In November 2021, an Iraqi-Italian restoration team working in the basement storage of the Iraq Museum in Baghdad opened a wooden crate marked Tel al-Hiba. Inside, wrapped in acid-free paper and cataloged under a reference number nobody had cross-checked in decades, was a clay tablet roughly the size of a man's palm. It was cracked along the upper left corner. A water stain had eaten through part of the third column. But the cuneiform pressed into its face was sharp, deliberate, the marks of a scribe who knew that what he was recording mattered, that someone, someday, would need to read it. The tablet sat in that crate for more than 40 years before anyone opened it. What the translators found when they finally read it did not match anything in the standard academic literature on Mesopotamian texts. Not exactly. The story it told was familiar in its broad outline, a divine decision, a catastrophe, a remnant of humanity that survives. But the specific detail buried in its third column stopped the lead translator mid-sentence, because the text did not describe a flood. It did not describe a fire or a plague or a war between cities. It described something that came from above, and it gave a number. 90,000 people descended into the earth. The tablet calls what drove them down a single word in Sumerian that has no clean translation, a word that scholars have rendered variously as pestilence, as wrath, as something that moves through the air and cannot be outrun. They did not know what waited for them underground. The tablet says that too. Before we can understand what that text actually records, we have to understand the world in which it was written, because that world is stranger and older than almost any living person has been taught to believe. Sumer was not a minor civilization. It was the first. When the cities of Ur, Uruk, Nippur, and Eridu were already managing grain at industrial scale, maintaining canal systems that would not be rivaled in engineering sophistication for another 3,000 years, and recording legal transactions on clay that would survive into the 21st century, the rest of the world was still organized in scattered bands of people following herds across open plains. Sumer did not emerge gradually, the way civilizations are supposed to. It appeared at the archaeological layer almost fully formed, with writing, with mathematics, with astronomy, with a cosmology that accounted for the origin of the universe, the creation of human beings, and the reason why suffering exists at all. That cosmology is the key to understanding what this tablet records. The Sumerians believed that the world was governed by beings they called the Anunnaki, a council of major gods who had divided the cosmos between them. Anu held the sky. Enlil held the earth and the breath of wind. Enki held the deep waters, the aquifer beneath the ground, the hidden intelligence of the world. Below them were lesser beings, and below those were humans, created according to multiple independent Sumerian texts, not out of love, but out of necessity. The junior gods had grown exhausted from the labor of maintaining the earth's canals and fields. They went on strike. And Enki, the cleverest of the divine council, proposed a solution. Shape a creature from clay and from the blood of a slain deity, breathe life into it, and set it to work. Humans were not made to be sacred. They were made to be useful. This detail is not incidental. It is the entire architecture of what comes next. Because the Atrahasis epic, one of the oldest continuous narrative texts ever recovered, written on 3 tablets in Akkadian, but clearly derived from older Sumerian source material, explains what happens when a utility becomes inconvenient. The human population grew, not slowly. Across the span of what the text measures in intervals of 1,200 years, people multiplied until the noise of their existence disturbed the sleep of the gods. The word the text uses for noise is not metaphorical. It is a specific term for the accumulated sound of human life. The grinding of grain, the crying of children, the arguments of neighbors, the constant low roar of a species that had gotten out of hand. Enlil, the god of earth and wind and storms, could not sleep. And Enlil's response to sleeplessness was not patience. He sent a plague first. The text of Atrahasis describes Enlil authorizing a disease that swept through the population at a scale that the scribes felt necessary to quantify. The disease did not discriminate. It moved through settlements and left them silent. The crops rotted in the fields because there were not enough people left to harvest them. The text says the rivers ran black with the bodies of the dead. Atrahasis, the man described as the wisest of his generation, the intermediary between the divine council and ordinary human beings, went to the temple of his patron god Enki and prayed continuously for 7 days and 7 nights without eating or sleeping until Enki relented and told him what to do. The answer was specific. Stop praying to every god. Stop spreading your offerings across the whole divine assembly. Concentrate everything on the god responsible for the disease. Make that god feel guilty enough to stop. It worked. The plague receded. But Enlil had not changed his mind about the noise. He had simply been outmaneuvered temporarily, and gods do not forget being outmaneuvered. He tried again. 1,200 years later, by the text's accounting, the population had recovered and was once more disturbing his rest. This time, he sealed the sky. No rain. No dew. No moisture reaching the ground. The earth dried and cracked. The livestock died. The fish in the rivers sank to the bottom and did not rise. Famine moved across the land with the same systematic patience that Enlil had. Again, Atrahasis went to Enki. Again, Enki found a way around the divine decree without technically violating it. The rains returned, the earth recovered, life went on. And then Enlil convened the full divine assembly and proposed something that could not be undone. The flood decision was not made casually. The text is careful about this. The gods debated. There were those among them who disagreed. Enki, most prominently, and Nintu, the mother goddess who had shaped the first humans from clay and was not indifferent to what she had made. But Enlil was lord of the earth. He carried the decree, and he demanded an oath from every member of the divine council that none of them would warn the humans. The oath was the mechanism of the plan. The flood would not work if anyone spoke. So every god, including Enki, swore the oath. What Enki did next is one of the oldest examples in written literature of a being finding a way to keep a promise while breaking it entirely. He did not speak to Atrahasis. He spoke to a wall. He stood beside the reed wall of Atrahasis' house and addressed the wall directly in a voice loud enough to be heard on both sides. He told the wall that a flood was coming. He told the wall the dimensions of the boat that needed to be built, the materials required, the method of waterproofing with bitumen, the necessity of upper decks and lower decks, the importance of covering the top so that the sun could not see inside. He did not warn a human being. He warned a wall. The wall happened to have Atrahasis standing on the other side of it. The technicality held. Atrahasis built the boat. And here is where the tablet found in Baghdad in November 2021 begins to diverge from the canonical versions of the story that scholars have been working with for the past century and a half. Because the standard texts, the Eridu Genesis, the Atrahasis epic, the flood narrative embedded in the Epic of Gilgamesh, all describe a single survivor on a boat with his family and the animals. The number of people saved is small enough to fit on a vessel. The catastrophe is total. The flood covers the earth and everything perishes except what Atrahasis carries above the water. The tablet from Tel el-Hiba does not say this. What it says, in the damaged but legible third column that stopped the lid translator in 2021, is that the boat was not the only plan. Enki spoke to more than one wall. He walked through the city of Shuruppak, and he spoke to every reed wall he passed, and the words he spoke described not water coming from above, but something descending from the sky, something that the scribe records with the word that translators have struggled with, the word that means pestilence or wrath, or a thing that moves through air. And in response to this thing that was coming, people did not build boats. They dug. The text says they opened the earth. They descended into what had already been there. The cave systems beneath the Mesopotamian plain, the tunnels and chambers that the text implies, were not natural formations, but had been prepared, that they had always been there waiting, as though someone had known this moment would come long before Enlil ever decided to convene his assembly. The number the tablet gives is 90,000. 90,000 people went underground. The text does not describe them as refugees, though they were. It describes them with a term usually reserved for a specific function. People who carry something forward, carriers of knowledge, carriers of seed. The text implies that what went underground with them was not just human life, but the accumulated record of everything the civilization had learned. The canal measurements, the astronomical tables, the medical procedures, the names of the gods and the precise protocols for addressing each one. The king lists going back to before the flood, to the antediluvian rulers who are recorded elsewhere as having reigned for tens of thousands of years each in the period before the world was reset. They took all of it down with them. And then the text describes what was above. This is the part of the tablet that the restoration team in Baghdad chose not to publish immediately, not because they doubted its authenticity. The clay, the cuneiform script style, the paleographic evidence all placed it firmly in the mid-3rd millennium BCE. Contemporary with the great Sumerian city archives at Nippur. They did not publish it immediately because the description does not match any known natural phenomenon. They were not certain they had translated the relevant passage correctly. The word used for what waited above, what descended after the people descended below, appears in other Sumerian texts in contexts that scholars have associated with light, with fire, with the movement of celestial bodies. But in those other texts, the word is clearly metaphorical. A god's presence descending like light. The sun appearing like a judgment. In this tablet, the word is used the way you would use a word to describe something you watched happen, not a metaphor, an observation. The text says the sky changed. It uses a construction that in Sumerian indicates duration. This was not a flash or a single event, but something that persisted. The sky was different from what it had been. And the thing that came through the changed sky did not move the way weather moves. It did not spread out across the land the way a flood spreads. It moved with what the scribe records as deliberateness. The word he uses in this context, and this is the translation that stopped the lead translator cold, is the same word used elsewhere in Sumerian administrative texts to describe the movement of an inspection party. A patrol, something that checks the extent of a territory to determine what remains. The 90,000 people underground did not come back up for a period the text quantifies as 7 years. 7 years underground. The text says they had prepared for this, the food they carried, the water stored in the cave systems, the seeds kept dry in sealed clay jars. The provisions were not improvised. They were calculated. Someone knew, long before Enlil convened his assembly, that there would come a time when humanity would need to survive beneath the surface of the earth for approximately 7 years, and they had prepared accordingly. The tunnel systems described in the tablet's fourth column, largely intact, unlike the third, are described with the kind of technical specificity that appears elsewhere only in Sumerian architectural and canal engineering texts. These were not rough caves. The text describes load-bearing supports, ventilation channels, storage chambers organized by category, medical areas, and what appears to be a dedicated space for the continued practice of scribal work. Because even underground, even in the dark, someone was still pressing clay. They did not stop recording. When they emerged, the world above was different in ways the text catalogs carefully. The text does not describe a world covered in floodwater. It describes a world that has been cleared. Vegetation had returned. The tablet says this explicitly, that the earth above had not been destroyed but had regenerated, as though whatever came through the sky during those 7 years had not burned or broken the land, but had removed something from it, or removed some things from it. The text uses a plural. What had been removed, the scribe records, was the thing that had been causing the problem. The accumulation, the excess, the noise that Enlil could not sleep through. But then the tablet records something that the restoration team found most difficult to interpret, because it appears to be an inventory. The text lists, in the careful administrative style that Sumerian scribes used for counting grain and cattle and workers, what the 90,000 people found when they came out of the earth. It is a list of absences, things that had been in the world before they went underground that were no longer present when they emerged, not destroyed, not buried, simply absent, the way a word is absent from a sentence that should contain it. The list has 7 entries. The tablet's damage obscures 3 of them completely. Of the 4 that remain legible, scholars who have reviewed the unpublished partial transcription have identified references to a specific type of large animal no longer found in the Mesopotamian archaeological record after approximately 3000 BCE, a material used in construction whose properties the text describes, but which does not correspond to any known building material from the period. What appears to be a reference to a communication system of some kind, though the specific terminology is contested, and a category of knowledge that the scribe marks with the notation reserved in Sumerian administrative texts for items that have been officially removed from inventory by a higher authority, not lost. Removed by someone with the authority to do so. The 90,000 people who came out of the earth brought everything they had taken down with them. The king lists, the astronomical tables, the canal measurements, the medical procedures, the names of the gods. And then, according to the tablet's final legible passage, they did something that the standard histories of Sumer do not entirely account for. They rebuilt, faster than the archaeological record comfortably explains. Within what the textual and physical evidence suggests was a surprisingly short period. The cities were functioning again, the irrigation systems were running, the temples were back in operation. The scribal schools were producing new graduates. The whole apparatus of civilization restarted with a fluency that suggests it was not being reconstructed from memory, but from preserved documents, from records that survived the 7 years underground intact, copied and maintained by people who understood that the documents were the civilization, that if the clay survived, the city would survive. What the tablet found in the basement of the Iraq Museum in 2021 seems to be asking, in the patient administrative language of a Sumerian scribe pressing a reed stylus into wet clay 4,000 years ago, is a question that the standard history of this period has not fully answered. How did they know? How did 90,000 people know to go underground before whatever came through the sky arrived? How did they know to prepare for 7 years specifically? How did they know which caves, which tunnel systems, which ventilation configurations would keep them alive? How did they know that when they came out, the world above would be ready to receive them again? The tablet does not answer these questions directly. Ancient texts rarely do. They record what happened and leave the interpretation to whoever finds them next. But in the final 2 lines, before the damage becomes total and the clay becomes unreadable, the scribe writes something that the lead translator has described in her notes as the most unsettling detail in the entire text. She uses the word unsettling, not because it is horrifying, but because it is the kind of calm that is more disturbing than alarm. The scribe records, in the same flat inventory-style notation used throughout the tablet with the same steady hand, that the 90,000 people who came out of the earth did not come out alone, that something came up with them, that it had been down there before they arrived, that it had been waiting in the dark long before Enlil ever convened his assembly or the sky ever changed. The tablet does not say what it was. The word the scribe uses to describe it appears in only 3 other known Sumerian texts. In 2 of those texts, it refers to the presence of an Anunnaki moving through the underworld on business that is not explained to the human observers who witness it. In the 3rd text, a damaged administrative document from Nippur that most scholars had classified as a routine temple inventory, the same word appears in a list of things that belong to the temple's inner chamber and are not to be touched by anyone without direct divine authorization. What was in the underworld before the 90,000 arrived is recorded in a language that knew exactly what it was describing, and chose very precisely not to describe it. That choice, the choice to mark something with a known word that everyone who read the tablet would recognize, and then to say nothing more about it, is itself a kind of record. Because Sumerian scribes were trained to be complete. They listed everything. They quantified everything. They gave dimensions and weights and dates and the names of officials responsible. When a Sumerian scribe records that something was there and then stops, it is not because the clay ran out. It is not because they did not know what to write. The tablet was not finished by an apprentice who had reached the edge of his training. The scribe knew what was in the earth. They simply knew better than to write it down. The wooden crate marked Tel al-Hiba is back in the basement of the Iraq Museum. The tablet is catalogued now. The preliminary translation exists in the restoration team's working documents. The full academic publication, with its careful footnotes and its cautious hedging and its long bibliography of comparable Sumerian texts, is expected eventually. When it arrives, it will frame what this tablet says in the measured language of scholarship, which is a language designed to make the unbounded seem manageable, to put limits around things that do not naturally have them. But before that language arrives, before the footnotes and the hedging and the comparable texts, there is a window in which the tablet says what it says without interpretation. 90,000 people went into the earth. Something waited for them there, and when they came out, the world they returned to was missing 7 things that had been in it before. 3 of those 7 things have not yet been translated. The clay that holds the answer has waited 4,000 years. It is not in any particular hurry to give it up.